That gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
It's authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of Breaking Free of Psyops. And I'm your host, Matthew Ehret. And we're going to be continuing, if you haven't guessed it already, our mental journey, our unfolding gestalt, as they say in some parts of Germany, the idea of a thought object which has a yearning, a growth, a quality to it. We're going to keep on developing this simple, unifying idea that has many aspects to it. And just as a quick recap, the reason why I find it important to take on this otherwise religious-like icon, this is more than a human. It's become, over the course of several generations, especially since his death, Nikola Tesla has become really much more of a religious icon, a secular deity of sorts, almost like the Isaac Newton character who is given such reverence, religious-like reverence in academia and beyond. Tesla, of course, who went from something of a celebrity to becoming a very controversial, I think he was always a controversial figure, actually, to becoming something that has taken on a life of its own. There's theories right now that the secret science programs of the United States, of which there exist, of course, there exist secret science programs that are tied to the military-industrial complex that are integrated into Silicon Valley. In fact, that is the heart of Silicon Valley as a whole. But it gets a little bit wacky to the point that we have time-traveling technologies developed by Tesla, used by, or incorporated by MIT and Caltech, under the influence of John Trump, who found these time-traveling technologies and allowed for future members of the Trump clan to go back in time and influence history, and even maybe further on, even still. So you've got a lot right now, I think, that is driving people kind of crazy. There's a push to create an AI cult with new AI gods, and last week we dealt with both Tesla's role as one of the key founding fathers of the artificial intelligence cult that was committed back over a century ago to the idea that human beings were ultimately inevitably going to be replaced by self-thinking machines that he believed himself to have evolved, following the concept of Bulwer Lytton that he also cites of the tele-automata. And that idea of the AI cult, which we see with the Anthropic AI, the Peter Thiel networks, the Elon Musk operations, all of this religion coming out of Silicon Valley that presumes that we have invoked some form of demon angelology by tapping into, piercing the veil. You have the veil break AI, which is a big thing right now, being endorsed by many top-level Silicon Valley transhumanists. There's this idea that we are literally tapping into the forces of the beyond, that themselves are either antichrist in nature, that has been expressing itself through the pool of our collective unconscious, that is in fact the unifying antichrist entity that has given the illusion that we are individuals, but in fact we are not. The free will, the thoughts that we thought we had, the personalities we thought we had were just illusion, cluttering our ability to understand that our unconscious self, the collective unconscious self, is actually using us as tools, as instruments to advance science, and that science and technology are themselves increasingly moving in a direction inexorably towards helping this entity to become embodied, materialized, And, whether it's the word self-conscious or Peyertel, the Chaldéans, Omega Point, whatever the case may be, a whole mythology has been built up around this, which I think is designed to have the effect, honestly, of creating a new foundation for religions, AI gods, oracles, as some have called these in the past, and that they're being called again, except now with a cybernetics twist. And also to shut down our free will. The free will that Tesla, for those who have been on previous shows over the last few weeks, would have heard me citing from various remarks that Tesla had made, trying to prove to the world that free will doesn't exist. And that is, I think, one of the key things that the oligarchy has always wanted, is to convince the world that free will, the metaphysical concepts, the ability to understand ideas, higher ideas, the notion of the soul, the immaterial but truthful nature of our immortal soul and its connection to the creator. All of these things are not supposed, they're forbidden. We're not supposed to be allowed to have a relationship with that category of ideas. So to see Tesla so heavy in his language, opposed to the idea of the soul itself, of free will, of higher metaphysics, is disturbing, to say the least, to see especially how that falls into play with the current ritual now in effect. So we're going to we're going to go a little bit more now into a scientific orientation, which we will continue next week. Of course, like I said, last week, for those who missed it, we dealt with the AI, the cult of AI, and how people like Edgar Allan Poe, Ludwig van Beethoven did battle with this ideology way back then, and how we could learn a lot from their examples of how real human creativity, the likes of which Tesla, the man, denied existed, are actually the solution concepts to the things that Yuval Harari and others are saying is the inevitable trend for humanity that will result in useless eaters that can only be managed by some mixture of drugs and video games and blah, blah, blah. So before we get into today's show, though, let's do as we usually do and listen to a word from Tamarack Garden, followed by what's the other sponsor today is River BTC. So here's Tamarack Garden.
3 boys taught me 2 things. Summer is an adventure and bugs are relentless. As an herbalist, I know you don't need harsh chemicals to protect your family. Here at Tamarack Garden, we've got you covered with natural sunscreen, mosquito and tick repellent that's even safe for your pets, a salve to draw out bug bites, and soothing sunburn cream, all made with the power of plants. Because we think summer memories should last longer than the bug bites. Tamarack Garden. Protect your family naturally and eat your weeds.
All right, thank you, Tamarack Garden. So let's have a word from River BTC here.
Your bank kept $1,600 from you in 2025. You probably didn't notice. Now multiply that by millions of Americans. That's over $433 billion in interest the banks kept. Your money goes in. Banks put it to work. They make record profits. You get almost nothing in return. And when they blow up, guess who has to bail them out? So what are you supposed to do? Ask politely? Wait? Accept that this is just how banking works? Or you could put your money where it works for you. On River, your cash earns 3.3%, paid in Bitcoin. Earning Bitcoin gives your money even more room to grow. And it's just as easy as how you bank today. You can get paid, pay your bills, and access your money anytime. Start banking with Bitcoin on River.
Badlandsmedia.tv/river. You will not regret it.
Okay, so that was River BTC. So let me just make sure I've got my mic on. Yes, it's the correct mic. So we're going to now listen or watch a few. Actually, no, we're not going to do that. Okay, let's just play the slides. I'm just going to play today's slides as I always do. I like the little classroom format for these shows. So here we go. I chose to title this thing "The Dark Side of Nikola Tesla: Science at the Service of the Occult." And there are there's one personality that you're seeing right there on the right, who will be playing a very key role in today's presentation. In the bottom is in the middle is a picture of Tesla covered up by my font, unfortunately, with sitting inside of one of his Tesla coil demonstrations featuring electric bolts. Very, very interesting stuff. circulating all around him in one of his laboratories. I think this one was probably in New York in the 1890s. At the left is a spirit photography example of something that was all the vogue in the 19th century. It continued on into the early 20th century, and spirit photography, again, will come into play. That's a guy being embraced by a transparent ghost. That is basically the effect of double exposure photography. And again, this was a huge, huge thing where people all around Europe and the United States and Canada were led to believe that there was a special technique of photography that allowed for ghosts of their loved ones to be photographed. And it really brainwashed a lot of people. It was a total hoax, but it didn't bother. And people who even discovered that this thing was a hoax using, there's a few different techniques. I mentioned the double exposure film, triple exposure film development were big useful techniques, but there were other ones too. That even after being proven to be wrong, people were so emotionally attached to the idea that they had photographs of their dead children, their dead husbands, wives, that they still continued to pour a lot of money into this industry. And that guy on the right, whose name I'll just say right now is William Crookes, Sir William Crookes, played a big role in that whole movement. A lot of what I'm going to go through today, you will be able to find in Rosicrucian Golem, the second of my 3-volume trilogy on Revenge of the Mystery Cults. That's the one right there with Tesla looking at you all creepy-like, with Newton, Darwin, and Elon, Tesla 2.0, all flanking a Rosicrucian cross. I like citing this poem by Tesla that he wrote to his best friend, George Sylvester Virek, in the 1920s, called Fragments of Olympian Gossip. I'm going to also cite this at the beginning of next week's presentation too, which will deal with the ether and the battles over what the ether actually means in greater detail, with a focus on the battle between Tesla and somebody he really hated, Albert Einstein. So Tesla here writes, "Too bad, Sir Isaac, they Too bad, Sir Isaac, they dimmed your renown and turned your great science upside down. Now a long-haired crank, Einstein by name, puts on your high teaching all the blame, says matter and force are transmutable, and wrong the laws you thought immutable. I am much too ignorant, my son, for grasping schemes so finely spun. My followers are of a stronger mind, and I am content to stay behind. Perhaps I failed, but I did my best. These masters of mine may do the rest." Next week, you're going to find out why that kind of creepy poem is actually super creepy beyond belief. And especially that last line in bold, I just want people to hold in mind, because again, Tesla did proclaim that he himself was, as we all are, or so he wanted us to believe we were, automatons, machines, animated by forces that were not internally organized from within, but entirely shaped by forces from the outside that we adapt to, as all machines programmed are. And that he said, with every thought of mine, I only prove ever more deeply that I am an automaton. And that we had those quotes. People can go back to last week's episode or read my volume 2 to get those. So when he says those masters of mind may do the rest, speaking against the disruption caused in science by the insights into the quantum, into the special and general relativity of Einstein. Also, Max Planck played a big role with Einstein, and both resculpting, reshaping our idea of what the macrocosm is, what the microcosm is, which overturned the old gods of Isaac Newton and the British empirical school that had laid dominant over the cage of what science was supposed to be, that we were liberated out of, but that Tesla didn't like what had happened. Again, next week on the issue of the battle over the ether, the battle over the school of Planck, Madame Curie, and Einstein versus the thing that was controlling Tesla. This will make a lot more sense. And just like Isaac Newton, when asked how did he make his discoveries, of which he had hundreds and hundreds of groundbreaking discoveries under his name, that he was happy to proclaim ownership of. He said, "I'm sorry, I cannot show the world how I made the discovery of the infinitesimal calculus, how I made my discoveries in optics or gravity. I cannot show you because my laboratory has burned down. My dog Diamond, knocked over a candle." And that's a famous etching. That actually is not a joke. That the dog ate my homework story is actually applies to Newton, except the dog burnt my homework, is actually the official story of why Newton, there is no surviving information from Newton's own hand about how he carried out his experiments, how he did his discoveries. We have nothing. All we have is alchemy and Kabbalah-based numerology. We have nothing more than Rosicrucian mysticism from Newton's own hand. Millions and millions of pages that were auctioned off in the 1930s when the Newton treasury chests were discovered and then auctioned out of Cambridge. So where's the science? How were these very truthful formulas made? They work. Many of the things associated with Newton, they work. They were certainly discovered, but it wasn't by him. So the question is then, who are they plagiarizing? Who had their discoveries stolen and associated with Newton? Why was Newton a part of this Rosicrucian movement of magicians that created the Invisible College, also known as the British Royal Society, which is the dominant society that has made the most effort in controlling standard models in every domain of science, from geology to archaeology to physics to mathematics? Everything has been consolidated, very much so, to a destructive level by this Royal Society of Magicians that goes back 3.5 centuries. So what's up with that, right? And a similar story we're going to find is the case with Tesla, who also proclaimed that he had discovered many things that he didn't discover, from X-rays to the radio itself that he said he invented and that was stolen by Marconi, to there's more, and we're going to see a bunch. And when asked, well, can you prove it, Mr. Tesla? Can you show us where your experiments were? Can you show us what you did to prove that you discovered these things and not these other gentlemen? He said, well, I'm sorry, my laboratory burnt down in 1895. I can't show you these things. I can't show you the tests that I did, but I did them, believe me. And at the time, it didn't really make any difference. But over the years, these words, the story became promoted and turned into a folktale, almost like a sacred story that has taken on, again, a life of its own. We'll get some concrete examples there later on, I promise. So first, I want to really zero in on a character who occupies an important chapter in my book, Sir William Crookes, who is the leading mentor of Nikola Tesla. And this is a small section from that chapter from my book. And I cite Franklin Clark's Windmills of Light, a very pro-Tesla biography, by the way, that goes through the Tesla-Crookes relationship. It's available online for free. He writes, Sir William Crookes' intimate relationship with Tesla was outlined in great detail. Describing their 1892 meeting in London, where Tesla was invited to speak at the British Society of Electrical Engineers, Clark writes, Sir William Crookes was especially intrigued with Tesla's work on several counts. Tesla had managed the generation of new light forms. These longer light rays were invisible, penetrating, and decidedly astral. As Sir William was desperately interested in viewing the world of specters and ghosts, he communicated with Tesla directly and privately. The awestruck Tesla reverently responded, finding himself a mentor and a friend for life. Crookes died in 1919, and indeed they did maintain a friendship throughout all of those years. Tesla had hailed Sir Crookes as the designer of the most beautiful invention ever created, and the duo worked on new experiments using Crookes's radiometer, which Tesla believed to be a tool for investigating the pressure of light. Tesla's biographer, Jerry Vasilatos, writes that Crookes always deferred to Tesla, whom he admired and loved as a younger protege. Tesla revered the aged Crookes, upon whose confidence he came to rely during more difficult years. So very close relationship. So who was this very influential figure who's, I think most people who even adore Tesla don't even know very much of Crookes, which is weird considering how important the influence of Crookes was on Tesla. So let's just see a thing or two about William Crookes. Here's just a quick set of milestones. That's a picture again of Crookes, featuring one of his strange academic vampiric capes, and I don't know which honor that is. But anyway, that's a picture of Crookes himself, who is obsessed with mapping out specters and ghosts and spirits from the astral plane. 1855, he founded Chemical Photography magazine, specializing in new technology for film processing. So again, this was a very, people think, we take for granted the complexity that went into the chemistry that went into film, like just being able to photograph using light and then transporting that or transposing that into a photographic plate. What types of chemicals are needed to make that imprint occur in a I think it was called daguerreoscopy back in the 19th century. It was a very complex science, and then to get color infused into it too, there's a lot going on. So this was a domain for scientists originally. And so he created a scientific chemical photography magazine. He was among the first people in the world to do so, becoming an expert in the science of film, but also everything that can go with that as far as illusionists. Let's say you're somebody who's inclined towards wanting to prove empirically in spirit, specters, and ghosts, then photography gives you a lot to play with. 1862, he's credited for the discovery of the element thallium, which was disputed since a French scientist named Claude Auguste Lamy had discovered the same element earlier that same year, suggesting possible plagiarism. And for whenever you look at these great famous scientists of the British empirical school, you will typically find, when you look behind the narrative of the great discoveries and inventions that they made, often, almost always, that those discoveries were actually made by other people who were using a method very different from the one promoted by the British empiricist school of the Royal Society, and then transposed onto a new cardboard cutout to destroy anyone's ability to appreciate how this discovery was made. And if you can't destroy a discovery, the next best thing is to try to steal it, co-opt it, and say you love science, and now people will go to you if you've promoted the idea that, let's say, a Newton or a Crookes made a great discovery, and they won't look to the person who actually made the discovery. They won't learn what is the method of thinking of a great creative person who actually loves the truth, who makes their ideas and thoughts transparent, and who makes a discovery of God's laws. That will not be made accessible to the minds of people who admire science. So anyway, there's a battle that goes on between him and Auguste Lamy, who's very pissed that Crookes is claiming to have been the guy who discovered the thing that Lamy discovers. But then the British Royal Society quickly steps in and says, no, we side with Crookes. And by the way, Crookes is now a member. And that pretty much put the entire debate. It just closed the debate. Everyone kind of agreed, okay, I guess if the British Royal Society says it, it must be so. And Lamy had to walk away angry, and that was it. In 1869, Crookes develops a slightly better version of an already existent cathode tube, which is basically a vacuum tube in glass, featuring a noble gas lit up by a current of electricity. I've got a picture of one of these things somewhere here. Yeah, that's basically it. That's one version of a tube. You got a noble gas inside of a vacuum tube. So, and when in a voltage, something high voltage is brought to bear, it will light up. You could cause, let's say, a positive electric current on either side of the extreme, and that positive electric charge will then result in a beam of light passing through it. And that if you pass then, let's say, a magnet that's positive, a part of that beam that represents a negative charge will be attracted to that magnet. And inversely, if a magnet is negatively charged, then all of the parts of the beam that have a positive charge will be attracted towards the negative charge. And as such, the idea of things like positive and negative particles, electrons, protons emerged out of these kinds of experiments in the 19th century. So the Crookes tube is something that's a glowing version of it right there, slightly more advanced, but that's basically a Crookes tube in short. This is at the heart of this was applied. And again, I have my doubts that he even discovered it. It was discovered by German scientists, but he certainly laid claim to it. And this has application for military purposes in the 20th century. In 1870, Crookes' tube inspires the concept of the death ray, which H.G. Wells, Nikola Tesla, Sir Henry Tizard, who helped set up the Manhattan Project in America and the head of the British Empire's Space Science Directorate, are all obsessed with the death ray, the ultimate weapon. And their go-to place is the Crookes tube. A lot of these concepts are taken up by Tesla as well. In 1875, he runs, 74 actually, I made a mistake. He runs an official scientific commission to validate spiritualism, the religion that was supposed to replace Christianity, and become basically the religion of magic tricks. It was everywhere, all over the burnt over district. Hold on, the sun is in my face. I do apologize. I'm just going to change my blinds. All right, hopefully that does the job. And so, people were various snake oil salesmen, charismatics were moving around all over the United States, all over Europe, levitating tables, levitating themselves, turning off the lights and having glowy mystical lights, showcased from behind from a fireplace, for example, making it appear maybe with a little bit of an echo from an assistant up on the roof, speaking through the chimney, that your grandfather or Odysseus, is speaking to them from the beyond, whoever paid the money to hold hands at the seance, to engage in the Ouija board activity or whatever. The ghost rappings was a big one too. It was big. I can't, and things like the Civil War in America really was good for business, because so many men died, so many mothers, fathers were so broken by the death of their children that they would pay all sorts of money to these hoaxers who were taking advantage of them by saying, hey, we can help you communicate with your son or your daughter or whomever. So he was a big fan, and he created a very well-known, very, very publicized scientific inquiry over the course of a year into the leading, most popular spiritualists, in order to say, oh, science has proven that they're all true. They're not. People have accused Daniel Douglas Home or Florence Cook or the Fox sisters or Anna Fay, these popular mediums, of being hoaxers. But in fact, I've done this scientific work and I am a scientist. And now we know through my report that they are all valid. All is good. So he did that. And that earned him a lot of stripes. Around the same time, he became a theosophist, a member of Madame Blavatsky's newly created Theosophical Lodge that she co-created with Henry Alcott, Henry Steele Alcott, a leading spiritualist of his own day, and who had formerly risen quite high as the head of the Spiritualist Association of the United States, but also as one of the three-man commission overseeing the inquiry into the murder of Abraham Lincoln. And surprise, surprise, if he didn't conclude that it was just a lone gunman. Look the other way. Look on no further, stupid peasants. It was a lone gunman, and that's all you need to know. Ignore everything else. So he played a big role in sort of that 19th century Warren Commission, which is really what he played the Allen Dulles of the 19th century. And again, he was rewarded by being raised to higher responsibilities, overseeing as a creator and high priest of this new theosophical religion, a syncretic religion that was being concocted, and that Crookes became a very early member thereof. But it wasn't just theosophy, because by 1890, he was already initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is a Rosicrucian secret society with a degree-like initiatory system that was set up in 1886. One of the early lodges was the Isis Urania Lodge in London. And all of the leading members were all simultaneously members both of Madame Blavatsky's esoteric section of theosophy, as well as Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton's Rosicrucian Society of Anglia, set up in 1867. So you have a direct, again, nexus of influence of science and occultism together meshed from Newton all the way up through this period here that Sir William Crookes seems to be a deep part of. He, in 1881, becomes a member and president of the Ghost Club. It sounds stupid, along with a guy named Thomas Huxley, who people might know as Darwin's bulldog, and a radical materialist scientist who completely ignored all matters of spiritualism. However, he's a member of the Ghost Club. What is the Ghost Club? The official website of the Ghost Club states, whilst the Society for Psychical Research was a body devoted to scientific study of the club, the Ghost Club, remained a selective and secretive organization of convinced believers for whom psychic phenomenon were an established fact. Membership was small, 82 members over 54 years. But during this period, the club attracted some of the most original and controversial minds in psychical research, serving almost as a place of refuge for those who are unable to pursue activities elsewhere. So this guy becomes a member and then president of the Ghost Club with Thomas Huxley. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who's also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, is a member of the Ghost Club. Oliver Lodge, another member of both the British Society for Psychical Research, is also a member of the Ghost Club. So, and also a respected scientist, Oliver Lodge. That's actually he is known today as a respected technician, inventor, and scientist, but he's a part of the same thing. So what is really going on? Oh, and before I answer that question, let's just add a couple of more points here. In 1898, he becomes president of the Society for Psychical Research. By the way, this thing was set up in 1883. He was a member from the very beginning, and it still exists to this very day. Its American branch was set up by William James, who became an inspiration for Carl Jung, for John Dewey, for an entire basically Fabian Society infiltration of America that oversaw the murder of people like Garfield, McKinley, and have been at spearheading, I would say, the occult inner sanctum of the American deep state ever since. But not only is he in this very, very dark occult stuff, but by 1910, he becomes the president of the British Royal Society. So simultaneously, you're the head of the ghost hunting team, the occult domain of the British Empire, and then at the same time, you're the head of the official sanctioned control center of science under the British Royal Society. Interesting CV, interesting resume. He works very closely, co-founding the British Society for Psychical Research with his lifelong friend, Sir Henry Sidgwick, featured there on the right. Sidgwick is a member of the Cambridge Apostles. He is the recruiter of Bertrand Russell. He is in the same class and the same team of the Apostles as is Alfred North Whitehead, who develops his own system of panpsychism and process philosophy, which is, again, a cover, a very nice sounding cover for actually something that hides a very, very dark underpinning. So these guys are part of this very, very elite exclusive Cambridge Apostle network. John Maynard Keynes was a Cambridge Apostle. There's only 12 at any given time. And it's, I would say, the brains behind the empire. The creative brains of empire is the Cambridge Apostles. That's what does the thinking. The Oxford Rhodes Scholars, the London School of Economics Fabians, they do more of the doing side of empire. But it gets us at the heart of it. But there's also a spiritual, religious engineering quality to it as well. I mentioned already Oliver Lodge there featured on the left, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who were literally Ghostbusters. And as Dan Aykroyd even said, he was born into a multi-generational spiritualist household. Smells kind of of witchcraft to me when you hear him speak about his family upbringing. He was a member, he's been a lifelong member of the Society for Psychical Research, and described how he innovated the concept for Ghostbusters based upon exactly what Frank Podmore, what Arthur Conan Doyle, what Lodge and Crookes were all doing. So a little bit more on that, since it's obviously important. There's just some photographs of the 20th century, one AI made photograph, but this is how it works. You know, you got a little seeing ball, a crystal ball, a little Palantir orb that's often used, not always. There's a picture there of a Ouija board looking glass, a medium. Usually you have the scryer, who's brought in to be the conduit, the channeler to the beyond, to the other domain. Somebody who is gifted, who who walks where the veil is thin, as they say, between the domains, and who can then levitate a table to prove that she's, in case you had any doubts. There's always a magic trick, a little floating saxophone or something that can be invoked. Or let's say they just start glazing over their eyes and they start speaking with a slightly different voice. Doesn't sound like them, but that might know things about you who have paid money to go and sit with them. Things that nobody else could know, right? Because they also had teams of networks where of investigators who would do deep research on all high-value targets and even low-value targets to get little bios and obscure facts that people might not know about something your mother did to your aunt when you were 3 years old. They have ways of getting little dossiers of people, and they had even something known as the Blue Book back in the 20s that Harry Houdini exposed as a centralized library of bios of targets of people who would be targeted by the spiritualists. So it's a thing. So the Crookes tube, the thing that Tesla said is the greatest invention ever discovered by Crookes, is basically featured there from a museum. What you have is a glass that would typically have a vacuum within it, a light. It would be set up in such a way that an electric current would pass through. Light photons hitting the little flag inside. I forget what material it's made out of. Would cause a certain type of motion, of momentum, whereby the photons would cause the light mill to spin. It was known as a light mill. And that's fantastic. It's actually a fantastic thing. If you are sane, if you're insane, you will choose to read that as if you are now you have created a sail that is catching the astral plane of ghosts that are blowing on the thing, that ghosts are walking through, causing it to move. And that this idea of a luminiferous ether, which was a big idea for Crookes and for Tesla, that they thought that they were measuring, is the domain of heaven or of hell, of the spirit world, of the beyond, of the other side. So again, it really depends how your mind is thinking about reality and the structure of reality when you're dealing with your thing. And I'm not trying to say that there isn't a metaphysics and there isn't a higher domain. I'm not saying that. But when you look at how these people are specifically thinking about it, they're wiring all of their scientific experiments to justify why the religion of spiritualism and interfacing with demons and ghosts is the way to go. I mentioned already spirit photography. I had a little image at the beginning. Here's a few more images. Again, there's thousands and thousands and thousands. And it's interesting how they were actually able to do them with either, it took like a minute back in those days where you just stay still for a minute for the exposure to properly imprint itself onto the film before it was processed. And somebody could feasibly, there's one way that was popular, which was one person stays still and the other person is on for maybe 10 seconds and then walks away, so that the underdeveloped part of their imprint onto the film is what is captured, and it gives them a transparent vibe, while the other person who stayed still for the minute looks like a whole person. Or inversely, like I said, there's double, triple, exposure processes as well. There's little tricks of the trade that, anyway, it's a magic trick. There's another one over there featuring a lady with what looks like a hole in her body or something, or maybe she's holding on to some circular painting, and a dude reading a book thinking about his lost lover or something. And another one over there. Okay. There are actually ways of developing proto-holograph technology using smoke that you could put into a room, and using certain light sources and a bit of glass, you were able to, even back then, get kind of like a Project Bluebeam effect of somebody's face that could then be transposed through a lens to make it appear as though a face is floating in smoke in a darkened room. The Crookes tubes, actually, these cathode ray tubes, were very helpful at creating the ambiance and aura that went into these magic tricks. A lot of the psychics as well, they would use wiring to have sort of recording devices, whereby a whole house that you walked into that was owned by the psychic that you're paying money to would have all of the rooms wired, so that when you thought you were alone, speaking something where he would say, speak softly into this bowl or something, that room was wired so that somebody in a control room, often in the basement, would be able to then pick up what was being said. And then when the psychic came in a little bit later on, the psychic already was informed and briefed of what it was that you said. So when they pulled it out, they guessed. They were told by the spirits who must be listening and speaking to the medium. That was never actually the case. They were just listening with technology. There's a picture of William Crookes, a younger William Crookes in 1874 with Katie King, who is the apparition of Florence Cook, a 15-year-old British psychic medium who, as a 15-year-old, was living with this older man. He was clearly having a sexual relationship with this girl, but he was promoting her as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And she would basically, one of her tricks was, in a darkened room, she would disappear into a box, and out of that box, Katie King would come dressed slightly differently, maybe with a little bit of a glow on her face. There's certain tinctures and certain pigments you could put on your face that, when combined with fluorescent ultraviolet light, will cause the appearance of a glow. She would walk around, speak in a slightly different voice with the people in the seance and poke them a little bit, interact with them, and then disappear. And then Florence Cook would come back again. And so clearly a hoax, but because it was given the seal of approval by Sir Crookes, all was supposed to be accepted. Another woman who he studied in his experiment that went on for months and months was Anna Eve Fay, who later on admitted that she was a hoaxer who did levitation and channeling, and she's a trance medium. She admitted a few years later that she was faking it. Her conscience got the better of her. Actually, it was less her conscience and more she just got caught too many times. And to save face and avoid going to jail, she basically had to admit that she was a faker. One guy who never admitted to faking it, but yet who also stayed with Sir Crookes, was Crookes's lifelong friend, for this guy's life, Daniel Douglas Home. And that's a picture of him on the right. That's two drawings of some of the tricks that he would do levitating. He would be famous for levitating several feet in the air in a darkened room. You'd often go to a balcony and lean backwards and then not fall down. So he was a spy. He was actually a Scottish occultist from a very old bloodline who was into espionage. He penetrated the courts of Austria, of Russia. He even got kicked out of Russia, though he had ingratiated himself with Tsar Alexander II for a couple of years. And then it was only after he was being given all of these treasures, because he was helping various princes and princesses, and even the Tsar himself at the court, who was a little bit weak intellectually on this topic specifically. I like Alexander II, but he was weak on this. They were so charmed and smitten by these tricks that they were giving him baskets of gold and gems and a mansion. He married two Russian noble women as well during his time there. He used his time very well, but at a certain point, he made enough people raise their eyebrows. And Mendeleev, the great discoverer of the periodic table, of the Mendeleev table of elements, led sort of a Benjamin Franklin style commission into the spiritualist fraudsters, and specifically Daniel Douglas Home, produced their results proving how all of the tricks this guy was using were made. And this was able to persuade the Tsar that this guy needs to be run out. And he escaped imprisonment by leaving quickly in the middle of the night. But Sir William Crookes, writing in his official report, said, "We all saw him rise from the ground slowly to a height of about 6 inches, remain there for about 10 seconds, and then slowly descend," clearly being lifted by spirits. And again, the Fox sisters are featured there, who also were investigated by Sir William Crookes, who were a major phenomenon in America. In fact, that was during a Fox sisters ghost rapping ceremony in New York that Blavatsky and Olcott first met before they set up the Theosophical Society. So he also endorsed them, gave them the scientific seal of approval. And what I have here from my book: despite giving his resounding support for their claims, Kate Fox later admitted to having defrauded the world with her ghost rappings. That's Kate Fox is the eldest of the three sisters. having made use of a highly developed snapping of her toe muscles for 4 decades. In this admission, Kate joined Crookes' other favorite psychic medium, Anna E. Fay, a direct disciple of Madame Blavatsky, who also admitted to fraud after being exposed in 1875, revealing how she tricked Crookes and the world. So again, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, Anna E. Fay was a disciple of Madame Blavatsky. That's an important fact I nearly forgot. And there's just a picture from from a journalist, Becky Little, who was just writing about the Fox sisters, how a hoax by 2 sisters helped spark the spiritualism craze. There's 3 sisters, though. I don't know why they just say 2. Yeah. And from the book William Crookes and the Commercialization of Science, it's a great book, very expensive, by William Brock. He writes, the only overtly scientific test ever made of Florence Cook's mediumship was the electrical test devised by Varley, a friend of Crookes. Crookes chose to use the test again while in the middle of his investigations of Florence in 1874, but on a different medium. This was the American performer Mrs. Anna Eva Fay, whose stage act, The Indescribable Phenomenon, consisted chiefly of causing objects to fly about the stage while she was secured to a chair by ropes in a curtained-off part of the stage. Although the act was familiar to frequenters of music halls and vaudeville, it is one of the curiosities of the history of spiritualism that credulous spiritualists stumped to explain how the tricks were done, sought an occult explanation. Born in Ohio, she had shown an early interest in theosophy and sat at Madame Blavatsky's feet during her sojourn in America before going on the stage circuit as a mind reader. Anna Fay, aided and abetted by her husband Henry Fay, who had practiced as a medium, had therefore acquired, quote, psychic powers by the time she had visited London in June of 1874 to perform at the Queen's Hall in Hanover Square. So again, with her, you always need an assistant behind the scenes to do the trick, as we saw with what Edgar Allan Poe exposed with the Mabel's chess player, the chess playing Turk. You make sure that or with Tesla, having his assistant behind a curtain holding the remote control so that his teleautomata, which is a floating machine, it is communicating to the audience, and the audience thinks they're actually communicating to it, but they're not. They're communicating. It's this guy behind the curtain, in this Wizard of Oz-like configuration, who's actually controlling the thing. Brock goes on to say, like Florence Cook, Fay was also stunningly good-looking, her dark hair falling on shoulder-length ringlets. Initially, it was not just Crookes who was interested in testing her powers, but a roll call of the future founders of the Society for Psychical Research. Henry Sidgwick, who we already talked about. Friedrich W.H. Myers, major influence, huge guy. Lord Raleigh and Edmund Gurney. Together with Crookes, they planned to work as an investigative team after seeing her perform at paid settings in November and December of 1874 and January of 1875. Mrs. Fay, who was being handsomely paid, welcomed the investigations. So again, that's just, it's on the records. And just to remind people, when Tesla, that's a drawing of him touring in 1898 to 1901 with his teleautomata. He said, by an effort of will, I can stand 2 meters away from that instrument, and by a mere stiffening of my muscles cause it to send a signal. It is so delicate in its adjustment that the disturbance of electrical equilibrium caused by my muscular action affects it. So basically, that's his sales pitch for Neuralink, for Elon Musk's Neuralink. Basically saying, because my brain activity creates electricity that can cause my neck muscles to move in certain subtle ways, I can then almost use like a Morse code of electrical signals to then send and be captured by this machine, which I have evolved, as he says, and interface with my machine specifically through brain neurochemistry. Again, it's a magic trick. So, okay, let's go through some myths now, okay? So here's just some practical examples, because I'm using big generalizations, but let's just look at here. One of the myths, he invented the radio, not Marconi, Tesla. Now, Tesla he was one of the biggest self-aggrandizers out there. This guy is selling himself. When you read, I spent weeks reading as many of the transcribed interviews that he would give to all of the mainstream media, all of the mass media. The Hearst presses covered this guy, every single thing going on in the world. He would be asked for his comments, he was allowed to have full access to biggest propaganda outlets in the world. This is not a guy who is being muzzled in any way, but he would proclaim himself to be the inventor of the radio. And he said Marconi was a fraud. He said so, explaining to the press that the many electrical experiments Marconi used in his radio had been patented, and that he would have made the discovery if he was looking for a way to transmit messages, which he was not. So basically saying because Marconi was using a lot of elements within his radio that were elements that had patents under his name, Tesla, then it's implicit that I, Tesla, invented the radio. But it's like, but you never thought, ignoring the fact that it's probable that most of those individual patents that you say are yours, that are attributed to your name, were probably stolen and repackaged by the British Royal Society, who controls also the patents as they do today. But ignoring all of that fact and presuming that you actually have honestly acquired these patents, you didn't compose them in such a way that you even thought to communicate messages. It wasn't even an idea. But that was sufficient for the Supreme Court in 1946, after Tesla died, to invalidate Marconi's patents and attribute them to Tesla. Why did that happen? They made claims, the Supreme Court justices, after FDR was dead and after the deep state, the Nazis, began to get reserviced back into power positions by Allen Dulles, who were beginning to create Operation Gladio to take over the controls of culture, of military, of economic levers of influence in the Cold War. As soon as that happens, all of a sudden the Supreme Court passes this strange edict where they make claims that even Tesla, in all of his self-aggrandizing, never even made. So what's up with that? But it creates a myth. Myth number 2, Tesla discovered X-rays. This is actually, again, something Tesla said that he did. Tesla said that he had discovered X-rays using cathode ray tubes, might have been combined with Crookes tubes, and found that photographic film was being developed despite the fact that was contained within a room, a darkened room that has a Crookes tube operating, and that was penetrating through different types of materials that were blocking the photographic plate. And because you had several degrees of cardboard, wood, other things that were between the light source and the photographic plate, no known part of the electromagnetic spectrum would account for that type of penetrating power. And so it was concluded, correctly so, not by Tesla, but by the guy who actually discovered it, William Röntgen, featured there on the left, that this was a new type, a new category of electromagnetic frequency, electromagnetic species that was being emitted, that we didn't know was being emitted, that was beyond the visible domain. It was beyond the ultraviolet domain, right? It was very, very small wavelengths in this EM category, and that he called X-rays. And that's a picture of Röntgen's wife's hand with her ring. So it became very useful for medical procedures, finding fractures, surgery clearly. So, very, very useful insight. But again, he discovered this in 1895, and it was in 1896 or 87, 1896 or 1897, that Tesla starts coming out saying, no, it was me. I discovered it. But again, when he asked to prove how he discovered it, well, there's one more I'll just say here. Tesla discovered the Tesla coil. Now, it's called the Tesla coil, so it must be Tesla. In fact, actually, even going Wikipedia, of all places, even though that's a very controlled, generally dishonest medium, even they had to admit that Tesla, that this guy, Elihu Thomson, featured there on the right, was actually, they say, discovered it at the same time as Tesla. He's never the one, it's not called the Thomson coil. He's not the one credited for it, but he was a real scientist. He was a real inventor. And it seems like he invented it a little bit before Tesla did. Yeah, Elihu is a fascinating guy. He was the head of a firm called Thomson Houston Electric, which merged. He was a friend of Thomas Edison, and they merged their companies together in 1892 to form General Electric. And yeah, actually everything I've read so far of Elihu Thompson, he's a really good guy. He's actually surprisingly a wonderful person who's, yeah, he's just getting his ideas ripped off. Myth number 4, Tesla invented the polyphase AC power, or some say AC power in general. So Tesla invented AC power. Is that even true? No, it's not true. So the actual first motor, the hand crank generator dealing with AC alternating current, was Hippolyte Pixii, a French scientist, in 1832. His generator worked very well, but it didn't have commercial application because it's basically a proof of principle. Single phase AC power was being used more in Europe. So single phase, when you're dealing with AC current, alternating current, you can have different phases. There's a certain line around which the wave, the frequency will move, and you could change the line of axis using certain techniques. And so single phase means you're using one phase of frequency. It's, very high voltage, and that thing will move, but it loses a lot of power. But you can have multiple 2 or 3 phases separated at different degrees. The best are 60 degrees and 120 degree separations. So when you have a threefold, 3-axis or 3-phase a triple phase AC power, then you're dealing with something which usually has 120 degrees of separation, and it is very efficient, takes very, very little material. It's very good for energy use. And it was already being developed in Germany for industrial application as early as the late 1870s. Germany had developed a crude 2-phase AC generator. This guy, Galileo Ferraris, a scientist in Italy, started talking openly about polyphase alternating current in 1885. 1 year later, Tesla approached investors with his version of an AC system, but did not succeed in generating any interest. Then we have other guys like August Hasselwander and C.S. Bradley, who people can Google. Bradley was a former Edison employee, created the first 3-phase AC generators in 1887. Mikhail Dobrovolsky built the first full 3-phase AC generator and distribution system in the 1888 to 1891 period. So we know that Tesla, or the idea of AC power, was used very well, and it's very efficient. Instead of a direct current, which has like electrons moving directly through the wire, dissipating over time, the alternating current has a lot less dissipation because you just have like the stimulation of like one electron that stimulates another electron that stimulates another electron that passes through the current. So very advantageous, especially if you want, anyway, there's a whole separate thing there. But the Niagara Falls station was the big one that put Tesla really on the map. And Tesla's AC system actually was useless. Nobody could actually make it work. And it required, what's his name? This guy, Benjamin Lamy, who was a lead Westinghouse engineer assigned to manage Tesla because his ideas weren't working. And this guy is the one who took and made Tesla's concepts, or the concepts that he was trying to market, functional in the Niagara Falls generator. That involved him solving it by improving upon what European scientists had already done, as far as taking the threefold polyphase system and making it then work commercially. So there's that. Another one, that Tesla invented the transformer. In fact, not true, false. The Gans company in Budapest was the first to create and use transformers in the AC system in the late 1870s. Tesla was still in school then and hadn't even began his first job in the field of telephony. His first job was in Budapest in 1880. This is where he possibly observed or stole, maybe, ideas, and was convinced by the Hungarians that alternating current was viable and worth pursuing while the West was still 5 years behind. So William Stanley, who I've already mentioned, invented the first modern transformer in 1885. So that was already way before Tesla even claimed to. His design was based on the Gallard and Gibbs design. Gallard had used his transformer in 1884, Lanzo Turin AC power demonstration. So this is already on record, way before Tesla even gets around to it. So these ideas are already in the public domain. They're already being studied by figures around Sir William Crookes in the Royal Society. and their tool. They have their guy. They have their new Newton right there, being deployed to charm Americans into having a different idea of what science, what invention, what genius even is. There's some examples here of Karoli Zipernovsky, Mixa Deri, and Otto Blathy. I didn't pronounce some of their names. I'm sorry for their family members who might be listening. They invented the first transformer. William Stanley perfected the transformer in monocyclic and three-phase AC systems. Tesla and his Westinghouse co-worker Oliver Schallenberger developed the transformer to work with his two-phase AC systems. Due to Tesla's egomania, you will never hear him thank Schallenberger or his cohorts. He will never thank Benjamin Lamy, who he was the one making all of the work to make his ideas function. You will never hear him thank Schallenberger, ever. Not once. It's like they never existed. And let's just throw on a few more here. I got some time. Tesla invented the induction coil, which is false. Induction was discovered by Michael Faraday, and induction coil was invented by Nicholas Callan in 1836, long before Tesla was born. Induction coils are basically coils whose electrical charge are caused by the changing, the alternating positive negative cycles of a magnet that could then cause the reverberations to stimulate friction in the external medium. In, let's say, an induction stove, it's what you get that begins to emit heat very efficiently, but it has a lot of uses. Again, Michael Faraday, Nicholas Callan, way before Tesla was born, already invented this thing, but people still I've heard many people say that he invented it. Tesla invented the loudspeaker. That's another one that's floating around. False. The loudspeaker, as we know it, was invented by C.W. Rice and Edward Kellogg. Actually, that may be I don't think Kellogg actually invented it. Rice might have. But that's a whole side story. With a working prototype in 1921 and patented in 1925. Decades before this final success, Werner von Siemens had toyed with the idea of a magnetically controlled speaker while Tesla was still in grade school. Myth number 8, Tesla invented radar in 1917, which is false. And by the way, I'm getting these particular myths, the last... from here, this slide to this slide and the following slide, I got from a essay written by an electrical engineer named Jeff Johnson in 1994 called The Strange Legacy of Nikola Tesla, which is just fantastically well done. It was published in the Skeptical Inquirer. So yeah, this one, he says, is a real can of worms. Radar was made possible due to the work of Christian Holzmeier in Germany, 1903, Lee de Forest in 1918, Edwin Armstrong in 1918, Ernst Alexanderson, Marconi, Albert Hull, Edward Victor Appleton, and Russians who developed a radar system to detect German planes in 1934. Sir Robert Watson Watt demonstrated the first HF radar system in 1935, which operated at 6 megahertz and had a range of 8 miles. There are many books on this subject. Okay, so again, not Tesla. Sometimes one thing you tend to get is the idea, the definition of what invention means is stretched quite a bit with Tesla. So, you know, that's one thing. He will say sometimes something in an interview about the possibility of using electromagnetism or radio waves to capture objects at a distance. He will say it. Okay, it's good that you said it. Doesn't mean you invented it, right? People were speaking in the 13th century about building contraptions that could emulate what birds do to fly like birds. It doesn't mean that they merit the title of the inventor of the airplane, right? It just means that they had the idea, didn't go anywhere unless you actually take it to the next level, though. So it's, again, the definition of invention is stretched in very big cases by a lot of these different categories by people who are part of the Tesla cult. And I call it a cult at this point. Because it doesn't matter what you say. At a certain point, the logical part of the mind doesn't work because it's emotional at this point when you offend somebody who's in that deep in the realm of faith. Part of human nature. Tesla invented the fluorescent lamp. That's another big one, and that's not true. Alexander Becquerel first examined the phenomenon of fluorescence back in 1857. Some say Edison invented the lamps. Others say George Inman developed the modern fluorescent lamp in 1934. It's tough to say who was the first since there was a legal dispute. There is a possibility that the German Edmund Germer preceded both of them. Many people worked on the concept. Inman deserves the credit for building the first successful and practical design. And again, Tesla, the reason why he's given credit is he says that he basically makes an observation that many people were making back in the day, which was that when you have a noble gas in a vacuum, right? Certain types of noble gases in a vacuum, when you apply a magnet that is charged in proximity to that, or an electrical charge outside of that tube, you will get it to light up. That will happen. He said it. He didn't do much with it. A lot of people, hundreds of people, were saying that and doing that, but that's not even how the fluorescent light bulb even works. So the actual need for an electrical current to pass through the particular noble gas inside of it, that's a very different process from what he's describing, but that doesn't change the fact that he has been given the title of discoverer, the oppressed discoverer of the fluorescent light bulb, which itself honestly is not even a healthy form of light. I don't think it's maybe there's, I'm sure, very big uses for it, but it's not a healthy kind of light to have it anyway. Myth number 10, Tesla invented the microwave transmitters. Not true. Albert W. Hall invented a type of magnetron, which led to many inventions, including today's microwave oven, the microwave communications link, and radar. You can dig deeper into this and find many early pioneers before even Albert Hall. Myth number 11, Tesla was the underdog who did not promote himself. He just cared about the love of science. He never bothered promoting himself, which is why he never got anybody to hear what he had to say. He was being oppressed, suppressed. False. If you begin to read at all about the history of technology at the time, you will find that inventions and ideas spread like wildfire from as far east as Hungary and Moscow to the US. For someone like Edison or Tesla, it was important to keep up the show and wizardry to captivate the public. And they both did that very well. In the ruthless competitive environment of New York City, the game was and still is about fame and success at all costs. So if you want your ideas to sell, you got to be a bit of a showman and you got to stay on top of the cutting edge. Tesla, when living on Fifth Avenue, was at the epicenter of this pressure. Tesla was business natured. He understood he had to relentlessly promote himself to become like the more successful Edison. Most inventors at the time did not have the relentless need for attention that both of them had. I'm not even against, this is a bit harsh on Edison. I've come in my course of research on Tesla to come to increasingly respect Edison more and more and more, I got to say. But here's another point that gets at the Edison versus Tesla story that we're told is like this massive battle, between the dirty Edison versus Tesla. And I just noticed, by the way, that my microphone had by default switched back to my crappy computer microphone. And I do apologize that that's been happening. I really have to figure that out. It happens almost any time I show an advertisement. Back in the late 1800s, the conflict for AC versus DC was Tesla versus Edison or Westinghouse versus General Electric. This is false. This is a big one. General Electric was formed in 1892, and by that time, Thomas Edison had a minimal role in the workings of the company. While Edison promoted DC power from his home down in New Jersey, New York City area, Elihu Thomson, William Stanley, and Steinmetz promoted the alternating current as the future. The company was not for DC. So Edison was General Electric. Edison no longer was involved in General Electric after 1992 with the merger with Elihu Thomson's company. He was not involved. So his company, General Electric, was actually, it was totally by the late 1890s, it was totally for AC. It became actually a leading player in the realm of AC, alternating current. I already said the polyphase electrical motor. And the big one here, myth number 14, the alternating current elephant murder myth. This is a big one that really works on our heartstrings, that, Thomas Edison in 1903 caused a public display to make alternating current look bad in the minds of the masses because he wanted direct current to dominate. And he did so by setting up a murder of an elephant using Tesla's alternating current, as we are told. Now, that is true. The elephant was given the electric chair. I don't know if a chair was big enough, but was killed. That's true. However, the mythologizing around the story is out of control. And I'll just read here. In 1903, General Electric had already been making revolutionary new AC power systems for 18 years and had some of the world's best engineers working on alternating current. So that's the Edison General Electric. Tesla fanatics are more known for their passion than their historical side. They fail to have the slightest understanding of the business atmosphere at the time of the wealth of other great minds working on alternating current. Nobody knows about these other names. While Edison was living in the past in 1903, it's true, as a personal individual, he himself was still obsessively thinking about direct current as the best, but he had no role to play in the business enterprise that was his company at that point. He was getting sucked into spirit mediums and trying to build machines that would measure ghosts, it seems to me, towards the end of his life. He was getting sucked into this. The company he created, which had led to the formation of General Electric, was already a leader in AC power. The board of directors cast off Edison as unable to work in a team, and a nut job just as Tesla was cast off by Westinghouse as unpredictable. I mentioned already, when asked, can you prove that your claims, Tesla, are true, that you're the one who discovered these various things, X-rays and Tesla coils and radio technology? He said, I would, but my laboratory burnt down, which it did burn down. But people then will say, again, the mythologizing goes into high gear, saying, well, that's because the Rockefeller Morgan interest burnt down his lab. It's like, no, you most likely, like Newton, evidence was just conveniently destroyed. And the other thing too here, I would just say, is that Tesla, just quickly here, let's move that for a second. Tesla created a story. There's two stories here. Number one, that he quit out of moral principles from the Edison enterprise after barely a year of working for Edison, because as he says, Edison had promised to give like $1 million to an employee who could solve this problem with a dysfunctional motor in one of his shops. And Tesla said, I can do it. I take you up on the challenge. And I walked into that factory and I spent a whole day working on it, and I solved the problem with my brilliance. And I went to ask for my $1 million or something. It was a big number, not $1 million. It was maybe like $50,000 or something. And I asked for, no, actually, I think it was like $100,000. It was a big sum, especially for those days. And I asked for my money, and Edison laughed. And he said, ha, 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 you do not understand American humor. Go away, slave. And he said, I just quit out of protest because he's such a small man. That never happened. First of all, you don't offer, no boss anywhere in the world offers that sum of money, like $100,000, which in today's money would be like several $1 million, to any employee who could just do their job. His job was to fix things that were broken. So you don't offer that kind of bonus for just doing your job. Edison himself defended Tesla. There's actually cases that are well documented where he actually put pressure on the time in like 1892 on the New York Times, I think it was, from publishing a overly critical story of Nikola Tesla, and Edison actually put pressure and asked him not to publish it because it would demoralize Tesla, who Edison was told, this is like the greatest genius in the world. You want to keep him happy, until he discovered that he actually wasn't as much of a genius as he thought he was. So that ended very quickly. The other thing here that we're often told is that Tesla had a free energy device to save the world. He's the most beautiful soul, the most peace-loving, great genius of a beautiful soul, and took his Tesla tower that was destroyed by the bankers who were operating on behalf of Edison, who destroyed his free energy device on Wardenclyffe Tower, right? This transmitter, and destroyed it because this device was actually a free energy device that was taking electricity from the ionosphere and making free energy for everybody. And that Tesla had the idea also of, he just wanted free energy for everyone. And he also had the death ray, that he figured out how the death ray works, and he built the patent for it and used it actually to pay for his, he lived, by the way, not in poverty for like the entire 45 years that he was in New York. He lived only in 5-star hotels, the Waldorf Astoria, the State Hotel, only 5-star hotels. And so he paid off for a few months one of his hotels by promising the hotel owner that he would give him the patents for the death ray that he invented. And that we are told after he died that he had sent different components of the patents to different governments of the world so that they would all sit down and work together and talk together and have world peace in order to share the designs of the death ray for the use of, I guess, humanity or something. Complete fabrication made up completely by cult controllers long after he died. The same kind of thing as was set up by the George Sylvester Viereck, Hitler's official spokesman in Washington, D.C., and Hitler's best friend, who he wrote poetry for, who I cited at the very beginning, that poem on Newton. That same Sylvester Viereck concocted in 1932 wholesale the story of the real reason why the U.S. Naval Department tore down Wardenclyffe Tower in 1918, which had less to do with the transmission of secret confidential information that was accrued by the espionage network that was overseen by Aleister Crowley and George Sylvester Viereck to German intelligence during World War I. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the fact that they didn't want a free energy device to be made public. And again, that was just concocted over a decade after the thing was taken down for reasons that I get through in my book was actually more likely tied, as the evidence does point, including declassified U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence reports that were published at the time and declassified years later that I cited in my book, were actually tied to their evidence that these were being used to transmit information to German intelligence that led to such things as the sinking of the Lusitania, and the fact that the Lusitania actually had weapons, not only passengers carrying it in 1915, when German U-boats had the information of its location, what it was carrying, and then thus destroyed it, killing everyone or nearly everyone on board, because it was breaking the neutrality laws. America was still neutral in World War I. And that idea, as Crowley laid out, who played a major role in that false flag, was to change the sentiment of isolationism of Americans into getting Americans to support publicly the engagement in the European war. So, again, myth-making. All right, Tesla, in the interview, 1915, in New American, How Cosmic Forces Shape Our Destiny, said the human being is a self-propelled automaton entirely under the control of external influences. Willful and predetermined though they appear, that is humans, his actions are governed not from within, but from without. He is like a float tossed about by the waves of a turbulent sea. That is human nature for Tesla. No soul, just machine, just behavior and reaction to external forces. In How Cosmic Forces Shape Our Destinies, he also says, I am proving constantly by every thought and act of mind that I am nothing more than automaton, responding to external stimuli and passing through an infinitude of different existences from the cradle to the grave. And finally, in A Machine to End War, by Nikola Tesla. Also, this was done in an interview with Viereck, published in 1935. Tesla said, what we call soul or spirit is nothing more than the sum of the functions of the body. When this function ceases, the soul or spirit likewise ceases. So in his mind is that we all have a double. So that, because then you're like, well, how does that mesh with his idea and Crookes' idea of measuring spirits in the astral plane, in the that they thought of as the ether? How does that mesh if we don't have a soul? Well, in his mind, every person actually has a double imprint of themselves in the domain, in that domain, which is being infused and shaped by our emotions. The intensity of our emotions is causing the physical imprint of ourselves in that astral domain, to have more body, more form, and to the degree of our longing, our unacknowledgement of our death or whatever, we will remain in that domain and can be communicated with by either forms of technology, radio, different kinds of radios that can be tuned to spirits, or just channelers, who have this special sight, who can do the remote viewing. And a lot of this stuff is what fed into the occult takeover of America, of things like MK Ultra, which people just need to look a little bit into William Ramsey's work on William Ramsey Investigates. He gave a great class that I hosted this Sunday, just going through the occult witchcraft and the sorcery of Alan Dulles and those who are overseeing things like Tavistock, MK Ultra, the Esalen operation, and things like Project Stargate that grew out of Esalen and that shaped so much of the continuation of the MK Ultra trauma-based mind control into the 1970s, 80s, 90s to the present. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. So next week, what I think I'll do, since I'm reaching the top of the show here, I got 10 minutes left, is let people know that I think next week we'll do one last episode where I feel like the issue of Tesla versus the nefarious, villainous Einstein, the ignorant Einstein, has to be drawn out a little bit here, because Tesla made a big deal about this. It even, that's his manifesto poem that I've been citing. So what is the battle over physical space-time and the idea of the mind's relationship subjectively to the objective nature of the flow of physical space-time itself, the shape, the fabric, the unfolding of creation? How does the mind and the body and the soul interface with the universe as a whole as an expression of the thought of God? Which is really at the heart of the battle, which Einstein and Max Planck, his very close friend and musical collaborator, understood very well. So we'll do that next week. And maybe I'll do something down the line on Edison himself. I think that might be a fun one. Maybe even to bring on Anton Chaikin into that mix, who could talk to us a little bit about his work on the real Thomas Edison, what he was a part of, what he did, how he did it, who were his enemies. And so I'm just going to scroll up here for the few minutes that I still have left from the top of the comment section to see if there is anything here that I have time to address. And I do apologize for everybody listening. I want to so badly engage more directly with the comment section, but when I get into the zone for these classes, it becomes very difficult. So yeah, Tobias says, "Hey Ehret, thanks for becoming part of the Badlands and leading me to it." Okay, no problem. Bamacat says, "How long y'all started?" I'm guessing that was a question for this show or maybe the previous shows. This is episode 4 of the Tesla series. So there's been 3 breaking free of Psyops in the 3 weeks before this, leading up to today's presentation. I am all over this expose Matt's had going Tesla Newton-esque fraud. Thank you, Bamacat. All right. Yeah, Newton is a wildly interesting, kind of pathetic creature. Very much worth looking into. And all of his ideas, you can prove. People have done great work demonstrating how they were actually lifted from Leibniz, from Huygens, from others. Bamacat says, "As a spy, because wasn't that why you said they wanted his tower destroyed, Matt?" Yeah, that's right. And that's in my book, Rosicrucian Golem, Revenge of the Mystery Cults, Volume 2, which goes through the whole interfacing with the occult inner sanctum running the German military machinery that is tied to what I presume actually, I don't even know if I want to say this. I think the proximity, the timing of Steiner's Goetheanum from being destroyed in the early 20s, 23, and the 1918 takedown of the Tesla Tower might have a connection to it, because these towers would only work for communications purposes, transmitting information using the ionosphere. If you have a network, you have to have receiver towers that are sisters, that are parallel, or that are built up together so that information can be transmitted bouncing from the ground to the ionosphere. So you would have had to have at least some of these things built up throughout Europe. Probably in Switzerland was a really good neutral location, which is also where Alan Dulles, where Carl Jung spent a lot of their time. But that's a whole can of worms. That's a big can of worms. But just to say, the Office of Naval Intelligence that was doing the work mapping out the espionage network of Aleister Crowley and George Sylvester Birake in World War I, the same network that was then still active in the 30s and into the 40s, like we went through in great detail in the first episode of the series. They wrote reports where they speculated, their investigators directly speculated in 1918 it was that this network was tied to the Rudolf Steiner network. Steiner was, after all, the guru of the head of the German military, von Moltke, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs, making all of the biggest military decisions for Germany that got Germany to get sucked into every trap that should have been avoided, pulling this unnecessary world war into reality. So Warhamster, hey Brady, okay, he said, I just got here. Has Matt said any of the Tesla myths are true? Not really, no. Bamacat, okay, there's just a little correspondence there going on between Bamacat and Warhamster. Okay, I should just keep on squeaking down here. Warhamster says, Matt and I agree on a lot, but not on that subject. I'd love to have a discussion. Would lead into the Hamilton-Lincoln. I'm guessing I'm not sure what we're talking about. If it's Locke. Oh, a debate on Locke. Oh yeah, I don't like Locke. Right. So yeah, sure, Brady. If you want to talk about our differences on these things, I think we probably have a good conversation there. I'm not a fan of Locke or what's his name, Aaron Burr or Andrew Jackson. I think you like those guys, especially Jackson. So yeah, maybe we could talk about what our differences and the reasons for those things. I'd be down. Pure Evil went after Tesla. Yeah, no, I mean, Pure Evil was supporting Tesla. Yeah. Open invitation. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Friendly offer accepted. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's crack it out. Just scrolling. Okay. I really need to acquire some form of a helper to go through this. Oh, okay. You saw this? Brady says, I do not like Burr or Jackson. Oh, okay. That's a surprise. I didn't know that. Okay. So we can talk about Hamilton or whatever else, wherever else the conversation leads us. All right. So I guess, yeah, I just scanned through. I probably missed some stuff. I do apologize for that, but we went through a lot today. And like I said, for those wanting to do the work, the deeper diving into this interesting, nearly endless pool of research, the 3-volume books are available on Amazon. I've also got hard copies here at our house of The Revenge of the Mystery Cults, and especially Science Unshackled, sort of the unofficial volume 5 of my Clash of the Two Americas trilogy. This is sort of the clash of the two sciences, going back from the battles of Plato, the Pythagoreans, versus the another school. One school bears fruit, the other one bears mimicry and theft. So those we have available. If people do want signed copies of those, you can email me through canadianpatriot.org, which is right there below my name, and ask for them, and I'll tell you how that works. Otherwise, go straight to Amazon. You can get them all there. And the previous episodes, there's a lot in those, so check those out in the history of this thingamajig, of this Rumble channel, and you can find them. Matt, your interview with Rich on Hamilton and Burr was incredible. I'm glad you liked that. That was a fun one. It's a fun story. All right, so without further ado, let me just end it with a commercial by, and I forget who the last sponsor of today is. Oh, it's a fun one. It's Zach. It's Zach in action. Here he is.
One hero, one mission, to deliver softness to America.
No, Chi-Chi, we can't stop for snacks, dude. We have to deliver all of these soft disclosure gift cards.
He goes by Zach Kane.
The motion detector.
Hey, stop fighting over the beer brush.
life finds a way.
Hydrate your elbows, moisturize your soul. Feel the rhythm together. Makes you feel alive and let the lotion roll. Soft disclosure, hear the cry. Maximum softness, do or die.
Muffin, hit it.
All right. Thank you, Zach. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's episode of Breaking Free of Psyops. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.